Welcome to the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit. These weekly podcasts feature expository messages delivered to edify the soul. Now let's join Pastor Dave as he presents this week's message. Matthew chapter 14, beginning here in verse 1. We're going to read down through, verse 9, 10. Verse 10, this is the story of John's beheading. Matthew 14, verse 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head and a charger. The king was sorry, nevertheless for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel. And she brought it to her mother, and his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. First thing here that really jumps off the page is that it says in verse 1, At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus. Now, what just happened in chapter 13? His townsfolk, the people in Nazareth, rejected him, right? They said, how does this man have all these things, these wonderful works and this wisdom? And they rejected him out of hand. They were offended at him, it says. In verse 57, Jesus said unto them, A prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and his own house. And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. So we have that at the end of 13. At the beginning of 14, we have fame. Jesus is famous in Herod's place. He's not famous at home. The people at home are offended at him. They don't want anything to do with him. And so he can't do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. And yet someplace off in Judea, in some palace, in some court, in some room, Herod is speaking to his servants, and he says, This is Jesus. And I think it's interesting that rejected by the townfolk of Nazareth, he's received by a criminal like Herod. Herod was a criminal. He was a dirty bird. That's a nice way to put it, actually. Now you'll notice it says there in verse 2, He said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. It is likely that Herod knew a great deal about Jesus. We know that one of Herod's stewards, his wife Joanna, was one that traveled and ministered to Jesus. So it's likely that some of the property of the steward was going to help take care of the ministry of Christ as he traveled. Joanna, no doubt, along with the other women, were the logistics people in the ministry team of Jesus. They were taking care of the lunches, and they were taking care of the place to sleep, and they were taking care of all the stuff that the men had to have while they traveled about. Jesus being the principal, and then the inner circle, the disciples, the 12, being just after him. They were caring for those folks. I'm sure they didn't try to manage all of the multitude. That was an impossible task. But just those who were going from place to place with Jesus, traveling and learning and being used by him in ministry. So Joanna, a wife to the steward of Herod, and also we find out later in the book of Acts that Manaen, who was brought up with Herod, he later on becomes a disciple. So these people are connected to Herod, and perhaps they heard of Jesus through him, or through them, or that is, Herod heard about Jesus through them, so he's familiar with what's going on with Jesus, the fame of Jesus, and all that he's done. Of course, everybody in Galilee has been touched at this point by the ministry of Jesus, except for apparently those in his hometown. It's such a sadness. And you'll notice that it says here in verse 2, and he said unto his servants, this is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Herod has a little guilt going on there, doesn't he? Just a little bit of guilt. And the guilt apparently has worked itself so deeply into his psyche that he now attributes this, the work of Jesus, to John the Baptist. There was a philosophy amongst the Jews and some of the Greeks in that day that if a great man died, his spirit might inhabit the body of another man and therefore complete its task, whatever it was in this world. Maybe Herod thought that was what had happened. Perhaps Herod actually thought that John was raised from the dead somehow. His body was about doing these mighty works, and they were calling him Jesus, but it was actually John. God had done this thing, and because God had done this thing in raising up a righteous man from his grave, mighty works are showing forth themselves in him. It wouldn't be the first time that a righteous man in a grave had done a mighty work. Remember the story of the prophet. They killed a man, threw him into the grave with the prophet's body, and as soon as it touched the prophet's body, the dead man came to life and walked out. This also must be part of the jumble in Herod's mind. He's got all these traditions and stories that he's learned, and now he's kind of jamming it all together. He's trying to make sense of his guilt. It's overwhelming him because he's killed a righteous man. So he's got it all backwards. But if you look at the statement here, I think it's fascinating. He does have it backwards. He says, this is John, risen from the dead, therefore mighty works do show forth themselves. It's not John the Baptist. This is Jesus doing mighty works, and he's headed for resurrection. So John actually, in a way, he prophesies backwards here. It's dyslexic. It's backwards and it's upside down. And it's because of this guilt that has so racked his mind that he can't see straight. And then we have this history, which is a very sad, very, very ugly history, very dirty history of Herod and his court. Verse 3, Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. And as I said, this is a matter of history. I went and got Josephus because Josephus has a passage in here about this whole bunch of them, people that we're going to talk about. For John said unto him, it is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. Now we understand who this fellow is. He is expedient. He wants to do things that make everybody happy. His wife, he can't please her. He can't please the people. He's kind of stuck. So this thing that's going on with Herod and Herodias, what's all that about? Well, Herodias was married to Herod, that is Herod Philip, the son of Herod the Great, who was born of Miriam, the daughter of Simon the high priest, who had a daughter, Salome. After whose birth Herodias took upon her to confound the laws of our country and to divorce herself from her husband while he was alive, and was married to Herod Antipas. That's the Herod we're talking about here. Her husband's brother by the father's side. He was tetrarch of Galilee. But the daughter Salome was married to Philip, the son of Herod the tetrarch of Trachonitis. These people had married and intermarried. And so Herodias, married to the brother of Herod, is actually Herod Antipas's niece. So they've intermarried and intermarried. She's married to Herod's brother. Herod's brother's name is Philip. She divorces Philip, which was something that didn't happen. Jewish law did not allow for the wife to divorce the husband. It allowed for the husband to divorce the wife. The Greek law at that time said that a wife could divorce the husband. Women had many more freedoms in Greek culture than they did in Jewish culture. And so Herodias took that upon herself. She said, okay, I'm going to leave Philip, and I'm going to be married to Herod Antipas, who was the tetrarch of Galilee. So in a way, she's moving up. because Trachonitis is a little bitty backwater nothing compared to Galilee. She marries her uncle, former husband's brother, which I don't know what that makes Salome, but anyway, it's all a mess. And it's all ugly. And so John shows up, and notice what John says. John said, "It's not lawful for thee to have her." That's all he said. That's all he had to say. He's speaking the truth. You can't have her on multiple accounts. Number one, she's your niece. Number two, she's married to another man. He's still alive. Number three, you're doing it openly and publicly, and I'm sure that there were other women involved. So John comes in, he says, this is not right. He speaks the truth to Herod. And when he would have put him to death, notice that. Herod wanted to kill him because he spoke the truth. It doesn't always turn out well, but it always turns out well. It doesn't always turn out well. It didn't turn out well for Joseph in the short term. It didn't turn out well for John in the short term. But the righteous still stays with their confession. And that's what John does. It's not right for you to have her. Philip binds him. He's going to kill him. But Philip is moved with the wind because you notice that he feared the multitude. So his wife, I'm sure, is angry, Herodias, on one hand, because this man had dared to speak against them. And Herod is afraid of the people on the other hand, so he's kind of stuck. So he's got John in the prison. He can't kill him. He can't release him. What's he going to do? Well, John's just going to stay in the prison. That seems to be the course here. They counted John as a prophet, that says the people did. Well, of course they did, because he was a prophet. He was the last of the Old Testament prophets, and he was a great one. Two things that I wanted to say about verse 4 and 5 is that we have two things revealed here. Not only the conflict that Herod had between Herodias and the people. That's one thing. But the other thing is we have the ministry of John reaching Herod. So John's ministry wasn't just to the common folk on the Jordan banks. John was also in the court of the king of Galilee. So his ministry is reaching into Herod's hall, and Herod's discount of that ministry is so great that he's going to try to kill John. But yet when he does kill John, he gets so confused by it, and his mind is so removed by it that he can't see straight. So we have this conflict happening here in John's ministry and in Herod's heart. Then we have, verse 6, the bloody birthday party. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she being before instructed of her mother, said, "Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger." The king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And when he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. Notice that it says there in verse 6, it was Herod's birthday, and the daughter of Herodias, we know this girl, her name is Salome, she dances before them and pleased Herod. This is not a chaste kind of pleasing, right? This is the kind of pleasing that a man gets when he goes to a strip bar. This is the kind of pleasing this is. So Herod is aroused. He is excited. He's happy to see this young girl. And no doubt in his mind, and I'm sure his mind is at this point fueled with alcohol, he blurts out to her, "I'll give you anything," hoping that she might ask for her mother's place. Because he's pleased. Now remember that. He's pleased. And this is not the chaste kind of please. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatever she would ask. So the girl has a blank check in front of her. But notice she is instructed of her mother. So Herod thinks that he's playing this young lady to give him what he wants because he's pleased. He's excited, sexually aroused. And he wants her. So he says, "I'll give you anything," i.e., so that you can give me something. What he doesn't realize is that she is going to play him, because back of all this, probably back of her even dancing before Herod, is Mom setting the whole thing up. And Mom said, "Give me here Herod's head in a charger." These are not Salome's words. These are Herodias' words. Mom has planted them in her mind. So Herod thought to manipulate her, but she had already been manipulated and was the tool of manipulation for Herod. Herod is stuck between those two forces of wanting to please his wife and wanting to please the people, and John the Baptist is right in the middle. And he can't do anything with him, so he just leaves him in the prison. Well, now he's going to get moved off of his stuck, and something horrible is about to happen. Notice verse 9. The king was sorry. The king's sorrow is not one that leads to repentance, but this is a sorrow that he's been caught. This is a sorrow that he has to do one or the other thing. He doesn't want to do either one of those things. So what's he going to do? The king's sorry. This is not the kind of sorrow that is godly sorrow. This does not lead to repentance, obviously. Notice it says, "Nevertheless, for the oath's sake." So he can't back out. He's already sworn, and he swore in front of his court. "And them that sat with him at meat." So he made an oath. He did it in front of others. There's no way he can say, "I didn't say it." He can't take it back. He can't backtrack. There's no mea culpa here. Nothing. The king's sorrow leads to something horrible. He sent and beheaded John in the prison. That poor John's just in prison. He's done his work. He's baptized the Messiah. He's prophesied to the people. He's preached to Herod. And now his life is going to come to a quick end with the slick edge of an axe. And so they behead John in the prison, and his head is brought in a charger. What a grim, gross gift that was. And I'm sure that these are court officials doing this, and they probably took the prettiest silver chalice that they had, probably something that held a roast of meat or something like that, large, silver or gold, probably very beautiful. And they took it with them to the prison, and they cut off John's head, and they allowed it to drain of its blood. Maybe they put some sort of absorbent material in the bottom of the charger, and then they sat the head down, made it pretty, and took it. Morose, ghoulish. That's what this is. I doubt the party continued much after that, because when a severed head walks into the party, very few people are going to be excited about it. The charger came, was given to the damsel, and what did she do? She marched right out the door, took it to her mom's room, and set it down on her changing table and said, "Here you go, Mom. Here's John the Baptist." So the king was sorry. We need to be sorry, but we don't need this kind of sorrow, do we? We need a sorrow that leads to repentance over our sinning. This man was just sorry that he got caught. He was sorry that he was trapped. He was sorry he had to choose one or the other. He was sorry that somebody had to be upset here. The person that was going to be upset was the people. So he was sorry for that as well, because he knew this was going to cost him politically with the crowds. Yeah, he was sorry, all right, but not sorry enough to say, "No, this is wrong. That's more than half of my kingdom." Because this is a man of God who spoke the word of God to me. And even though I didn't like it, and even though at the time I wanted to kill him, I'm not going to do that now. He could have said that. And everybody seated there would have understood this is more than half his kingdom. Nobody would have said anything to that. But no, he gives in. He's drunk, he's teased, he's titillated, all the rest. And so he goes along with the plan. And Herodias no doubt knew that he would. She's the one that set this up. So having been manipulated, having all of this happen to him, we come back to the very first words in 14. At the time Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, he said unto his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him." He's now thinking about what has happened. He can't get it out of his mind. He is so haunted by the death of John that it is influencing him. It's beginning to degrade him. And then we have verse 12. "And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus." There's a lot here actually in verse 12. John had disciples. We didn't know that before now. The last time we saw John, he was coming out of the wilderness in chapter 3. He was baptizing in the Jordan. He was preaching there. Jesus came to him and was baptized by him. We didn't know there were disciples of John's, but now we do. So John had a ministry that had gathered men, just like Jesus has a ministry that has gathered men. And they called him rabbi, no doubt. He's a prophet, but he's training them. Maybe he's training them in the ways of the Old Testament prophets. Perhaps he's trying to revive Elisha's school for prophets. And so these men have come to study under John so that they too can be prophets like him. But now their teacher is dead, so they take the body and they bury the body. Of course, we don't know where that is. Over the years, over the course of my lifetime, there have been 2 or 3 different times when there have been announcements that the body of John the Baptist has been found, But I doubt that anyone has any idea where John was buried. I'm sure that there are traditional sites for that, but I don't know that anyone really truly knows. But then we have this last statement. They buried it and went and told Jesus. This verse would be perfectly fine without those last 5 words, right? You could say his disciples came, took up the body, and buried it, period. But what they did after that, all that they did there in verse 12, coming, taking, and burying, we understand that because that's what they would do. They're his disciples. So they love him and they want to take care of him. But notice that end piece, and went and told Jesus. What a wonderful thing to go and tell Jesus. I remember hearing the story about Edwards was preaching this funeral, and the man's widow and his children were seated on the front of the funeral service, and the wife of the deceased man had her youngest babe in her arms, and then they trailed off beside her in age down to the next youngest. And Jonathan Edwards chose this passage for that message. And he said, whenever we don't know, whenever we are at our ends, when everything has come to a conclusion, when life surprises us and we are without answers and we don't know where to go, we go and we tell Jesus. So here's wonderful little piece right at the end of verse 12 has such devotional dynamite. It's a magnet for us because, of course, isn't that what we do as well? Isn't that what we should do? When life executes our purpose, we go and tell Jesus. When the godly man comes to an end, we go and tell Jesus. When that loved one passes away and we don't know where to turn, we go and we tell Jesus. And the disciples of John, whatever they may have been, whatever they were training for, they knew enough to go and tell Jesus. And you know why? I'll tell you why. Because John told them to. John was always pointing to Messiah, and he knew who that was. So tonight, as I close, go and tell Jesus. Hey there, friends. Just wanted to remind you to go out and get yourself a copy of my new book, Christianity to the Life, by Cotton Mather, edited by me, David Smith. You can find it at Amazon. It's a paperback. It's also in Kindle form, so you can get it for your Kindle or you can get it for your library at home, however you'd like to have it. If you do, I really would appreciate if you would write a review after reading it. Let me know what you think. And it's a really good book. It'll encourage your Christian walk with the Lord. So go out and get Christianity to the Life today on Amazon.
Jesus will meet you.
Thanks for listening to this week's message. Please join us again next time for another installment of the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit.